Okay, hi booktube, Aaron here. I hope you're doing okay. Today I'm going to be doing my what month are we on now? My November wrap up, and then I will be going through some books that I hope to be reading in December. November has been numerically and probably in terms of sort of pages and in terms of the quality of books and whatever way you can really think of it. It's been a very good reading month, and I think a little differently to past wrap up videos. I'm going to go backwards through the month. This is because I think about halfway through the month, around there, I did um, a random reading update. And so a lot of books from the beginning of the month you've already heard about. So I'll start with the books that I've finished more recently since then, and then I'll just quickly go over the ones I've already mentioned, just just to be a completist. Um, so the most recently finished book is Faces of Love. It's Hafez and the Poets of Shiraz, edited and translated by Dick Davis, and this was really fascinating. Just a great glimpse into the world of Persian poetry from sort of the 14th century, I believe. And there are three poets in here. So we've got Hafez, who I read. There's a very slim little black penguin of some of Hafez's poems that are selected from here. There's also Jahan Malek Khatun, who she's a really great poet. I think she was my favourite in there. Just lots of very sad, heartbroken poems. And then there's Obaid-e Zakani, who is a kind of Persian equivalent to Catullus, I think. Um, very lewd and doesn't really care what people think, it seems. So generally, I really enjoyed this. I got the impression that Dick Davis, as a translator, really loves these poets and was doing his best to not only get the poets across, but get his love for them across at the same time. And actually, there are four poets in here because in an appendix at the back, there are three poems that Dick Davis wrote about translating Hafez, which is really cool. They were quite fun. Another thing I noticed in here, which I thought was quite funny, is that we've got an index of English first lines, so all the first lines in English, and then we've got them all in Persian as well, which was pretty cool. But initially I didn't notice the English one, so I just thought that the index was just in Persian, and you'd have to just learn another language if you wanted to use it. But yeah, I really appreciated this, and I can see that Davis has translated loads of Persian classics. So at some point I'm gonna just dive in there. One of the great events during November was Dr. November, which was and hopefully will be next year, a great event about espionage fiction, something I don't read enough of, and so I try my best to get a bit of it in. And really, I've just been concentrating on John le Carre. And here we've got his first book, Call for the Dead, which is kind of a murder mystery. I have a feeling the next book after this, his second book, will be a bit more of a murder mystery. But yeah, it's really good. It's very atmospheric. It's set in London in the 50s, which is it's the kind of setting I don't always like. I think there's a lot of British TV that's very nostalgic about London in the 50s and 60s, and it's not something I feel particularly nostalgic for, since I wasn't alive then. But it still kind of comes across even kind of quite subtly. But I kind of liked it in this, even though it wasn't, it's not nostalgia, it's just presenting the present day in this book, which might be why I prefer it. But yeah, I really like it. As I said, very atmospheric, and yeah, it's a great introduction to the Smiley books. He's unlike in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. He's actually the kind of protagonist of the book, which was a lot of fun. Next up, we've got a poetry collection. This is Second Childhood by Fanny Howe. I don't really have anything to say about Second Childhood. It was a very, quite, for me, quite bland, very beige poetry collection. Every now and then there'd be a turn of phrase that I quite liked, but yeah, wasn't really much to write home about, unfortunately. And then another Dr. November book, although it doesn't quite fit in, since in Dr. November they were mainly focusing on the Cold War years, and this is just a little bit before, I believe, and that's the 39 Steps by John Buchan, which I, again, really enjoyed. It is just a classic page turner, really, and Hannah is a great voice. He's I don't know, sometimes very matter of fact, sometimes very funny, and yeah, I largely enjoyed it, although I kind of got the impression that the whole adventure in Scotland is just kind of there to kill time until the end of the book. But it's a great adventure, so I don't really mind that much. And there are a few books I've read. Some of the other Le Carre books that I read, and The Secret History that I read, and sort of a few books I've been reading recently. It's been getting me thinking about, when you're reading a novel, the point of view is always going to give up something of the plot. It's going to not necessarily give anything away, but it's going to put certain restrictions in place in what you can do. And so so Richard Hannay almost dies innumerable times in here, but it's all going to be okay because he's telling the story, and just that kind of stuff that's kind of obvious, and I've thought it before, but there are some other ways that restriction could come in that I might talk about a little bit more at some other point. A couple of poetry ones. I finished this little anthology of 20th century French poetry, edited by Stephen Roma, which I largely enjoyed. Lots of poets in here that I'll be sort of going back to and checking out again. A few more bland beige poets as well, but you're kind of always going to get that in an anthology. And I finished Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, which I, again, really enjoyed. There were some bits that I just really loved. I really enjoyed, I think I mentioned it when I read some Walt Whitman, that I was about to start a section called, what was it called? Something about autumn, autumn rivulets, which I think is my favourite section, and it is about getting older and sort of thinking about the fact that you're going to die. And I found, I hadn't read it in ages, but probably my favourite Walt Whitman poem, which I can't find now, but it's called This Compost, which is, I think it's a really interesting Walt Whitman poem, because there's lots of celebration and it's all about vitality and life and stuff like that. And I suppose at least part of this compost is him, looking at soil, at the nutrients in the ground, and realizing that it's all made out of dead stuff, and the fact that so much natural life just comes out of decomposition and death, and I think in that moment he's actually quite disturbed by that. At least in that poem, he finds it very difficult to celebrate. At least that's the way I read it. I might be wrong, but I like that, because you get a slightly disturbed, and I don't know, he's kind of on his toes and not completely in his usual territory. So I really quite like that. But yeah, it goes down really easily. Walt Whitman, he's even though his poems are really long and not everything is going to make sense, but it is still very accessible. At least that's kind of what I've found. And then then we're up to the ones that I read earlier in the month that I already mentioned. So we've got The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I really enjoyed. Might be my favourite thing that I've read this month, but not entirely sure. It's all, a few things are sort of battling out. But I really enjoyed this. This was another one of those books that got me thinking about how the way a story is told might make some restrictions, and it's similar to the 39 Steps. One of the protagonists is it's in a first person point of view, and so I mean Donna Tartt does get about as she pushes it about as far as it can go with that point of view, and making you wonder whether everything's going to be okay, because a lot could still go wrong and a character still survive. You don't know what circumstances they're telling the story in, but I think she pushes it just about as far as you can in that book. And another one that got me thinking about this was Silverview by John le Carré. This is his last book, basically. And with this one, it's not first person. It is in the third person. But in this one, you've got these kind of alternating plot lines that, by the way that they are alternating, you just know that they're going to be connected eventually, and it becomes kind of quite obvious how they're going to be connected quite early on. And so again, just the way it's told is kind of restricting how much you can do in the book, if that makes any sense. And then again, I've already mentioned it, but The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which was how I kicked off Dr. November at the beginning of the month, and again, really enjoyed it. And it is up there. It's been my favourite le Carré so far. I think we'll leave it there. Even though I think I gave this a lower rating than The Constant Gardener, which I've also read, which is odd, but I think I somehow still prefer The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. I also finished Dantes Inferno, which I have forgotten to get, but I'm currently on Purgatory, and I'm not very far, only a few cantos in, but I will be reading this through through December, and probably a fair bit into January as well, I expect. Another ongoing one is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. This is the Maud translation, I believe. Let's have a look. I'm fairly certain it's the Maud translation. I've popped the French flap in an annoying place, but I'm really enjoying Anna Karenina. Just such great characters that you just start feeling so much for so quickly. It's quite remarkable in that sense. And there are some sections that are just written beautifully and just get you feeling really lovely and fuzzy, even if there are lots of things in here that aren't so lovely and fuzzy. And for me, my favourite characters so far are there's Dolly and Kitty, these two sisters who are I think probably two of the most decent characters in the whole book. And there's Levin as well, because I think I always have a bit of a soft spot for sensitive and melancholy farmers. He gets a mention as well. I do find Karenin, Anna's husband, quite interesting, just because he is incredibly repressed, and do find him interesting. But he is full of contradictions, and you think, okay, he's not actually that bad, and then you kind of realise that he's, at least partly responsible for a lot of what's going on in the book. And then another ongoing one is The House of Government by Yuri Slezkine, which is all about the Russian Revolution and the sort of Soviet experiments. And I think I'm past the halfway point now, and I was thinking I'd barely picked this up, but actually I was having a look, and I think I actually made quite a lot of progress in December, in November. So yeah, um, I'll likely still be reading it next year, but that's okay. And then it's just on to things that I want to read next month. And I'm keeping this fairly slim, mainly because of the House of Government and Anna Karenina. They're both pretty big, and so I want to give them plenty of time. But there are just a couple of things that I kind of have to read for December, I think. So I'm sort of co-hosting an event called Remember December, which is a rereadathon, and so it's all about rereading, and there are different ways you can take part. Although really, to take part, all you have to do is read a book that you've read before. But if you need a bit of an encouragement, we've got sort of 3 prompts, so you can read a book that you've read before to find out how you really feel about it. You can reread a book in a different way, and I'm just looking for my notebook, so I've forgotten the other one. And you can reread a book you've basically forgotten. So quite appropriate that's the prompt that I forgot. I've got 2 books that I want to read that are books that I've read before, and I just want to reread them to see what I think about them. The first is The Hearing Trumpet by Leonora Carrington. I didn't particularly love this the first time round, and I was kind of saddened that I didn't like it, because I like Leonora Carrington's paintings and find her really, really intriguing. And so I really wanted to like it, and I suppose I will try reading this in a slightly different way as well, because I read it quite quickly. So I might try and read it a little slower, with a little more patience, and I'll just see whether it wins me over this time round. I've also sort of bought online her book Down Below, which is about being put in a mental institution, I think in Madrid, and her experiences there. So I have ordered that, and I'm looking forward to reading that at some point. I might squeeze it in December. And then a book that I really loved in the past was The Bel Jar by Sylvia Plath, and I'm just intrigued, after a few years have gone by, to see what I think of this now. So there are 2 books that I want to reconsider and see whether I've changed in the time since I last read them. Another book, I want to read this book. Well, it kind of fits into all 3. I want to find out how I really feel about it. On the whole, I've basically forgotten it, and again, I want to read it a little differently. And this is 4 Quartets by T.S. Eliot, which I read about 4 years ago, and I can remember really, really enjoying it, and I've had the lasting impression that this is the best thing that T.S. Eliot wrote. But there are long passages that I just can't remember at all, and can't really remember what he's talking about. I think because a lot of it is quite philosophical and quite vague. But really all I have is the impression that a lot of it was philosophical and vague, which really doesn't quite support the idea that this is the best thing that he wrote. So I'm going to reread it. I'm going to read it very slowly and very carefully. I might even, split up into 4 parts, and so I might read a part, go back to the beginning of that part, and just reread it as many times as I feel like I need to. So yeah, I'm gonna reread 4 quartets in as laborious a way as I can. A few poetry picks then. I want to read Prague with Fingers of Rain by Vítězslav Nezval, who a Czech poet, a kind of surrealist Czech poet, apparently. And this is translated by Ewald Osers, or Ozers. And that's kind of all I know about it. I expect a lot of it is going to be about Prague. And then when I get closer to Christmas, I want to read this. This is Glad Christmas Comes. And these are some Christmas poems by John Clair. Sean D. Standfast very kindly sort of gave me this the last time I saw him while I was popping down to help with sort of moving things, or maybe it wasn't the last time, maybe it was the time before that. And yeah, these are just he's got quite a few of these little selections of John Clair in these little chapbooks, and they're normally sort of thematic. And so these are just a handful of poems by John Clair about Christmas. So yeah, I thought I'd read them in December to get in the Christmas spirit. And then there are 2 things that are kind of maybes then. If there's enough time towards the end of the year, I think my favourite week of the year is that week between Christmas and the New Year. And if I don't have much going on, and if I've managed to read quite a lot in December, then I'm going to give myself a little treat, and I will read The Broken Road by Patrick Leigh Fermor and finish off this trilogy, this long journey that he's been on from the Hook of Holland to Constantinople. And just following him on that journey has been one of my favourite things this year. So I'm really looking forward to the last leg of the journey. And then last year in December, I was reading Dubliners, and I strategically started reading on a certain date so that I would finish up with the last story in the collection, The Dead, on Christmas Eve. And I think I want to do that. Well, no, I'm not going to do that again, but I might just read the Dead on Christmas Eve. I don't think I'll reread the whole collection. But maybe next year in 2024, I might try and do Dubliners in December again. So yeah, let me know if that's something you'd be interested in next year. But I think this year I'll just be reading The Dead. And that's where we are. So I've only given myself a small pile of stuff, a relatively small pile of stuff to read in December. But then that is, on top of this. The 2 big ones, I'm already pretty much halfway through each. So technically that pile's only half as big as what it looks like. So I think I'll leave it there. I do have another little pile of poetry books that they're not really a serious TBR or really a pile of possibilities. They're more just there for my consideration. I've just left them out in a pile so that if there's a gap in my poetry reading, I'll just pick them up at random. So I'll just notice. I'll talk about them if I end up picking them up. I'm looking around to see if there's anything I've forgotten. I don't think I have. So I'll leave it there. So thank you very much for watching. I'm sure I'll see you soon in something else. But yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Take care.